to The Family Skeptical, Parenting Through Nonbelief.
We're a married atheist couple raising two wonderful, strange children. We ask big questions, dissect weird parenting moments, and examine how society ignores or misrepresents families like ours. If you're any stripe of nonbeliever who's involved in raising children, welcome. You are our people.
Our kids have heard all our swears, but yours might not have. So be thoughtful if there are young people listening with you.
Moms.
Pops.
What up?
We have had a busy time.
And we will continue to have a busy time.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. Some of which I think we'll talk a lot more about on the next episode. But we just got back from the American Atheists Convention.
Our very first?
Yeah. The only other thing I've been to was BajaCon, which is much smaller. And we went with the boys.
Mm-hmm.
And it was great. And we both sort of broke as human beings.
Well, the elevator broke me.
My brain broke me. So the conference was really interesting. And I had terrible anxiety-induced insomnia based on things totally unrelated to the conference. And then the elevators broke you.
Yeah, full disclosure, I have a famously bad equilibrium, and I got so motion sick that it just carried over for the two subsequent days. Fun times.
Yeah, so we were both having a great time and also sort of like barely functioning. It was a weird mix of things.
Well, we got to meet a lot of cool people, and it was just really great going now that we're a couple of years into our podcast, because we know more what we're looking for. We're getting to the point where we want to collaborate with people, to bring on guests, and just to reach out and be a bigger part of the community.
And people were just generally so lovely and welcoming.
So nice. Yeah.
Is there anything that surprised you about the conference?
I thought it would be weirder. Like there are the obligatory people with, some weird outfits, but for the most part, it was just kind of pleasantly vanilla. Mm-hmm. I was hoping that there would be a surprising amount of cultural diversity, but it was, mostly older white people. And I get, demographics in America being what they are, that I should have expected that, but I was still hopeful.
Yeah. Though not exclusively.
No, of course not
sure.
Exclusively.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I kind of went in with no expectations. I think generally, and we didn't go to all the talks. We spent a long time sort of by the tables and just chatting with people. But, generally I got more out of the talks than I was expecting. Like, I think
some of them were really good.
Yeah. I think everyone sort of had something that I hadn't thought about, which was really great. And I don't have everybody's name in front of me because I'm still recovering from being a broken person. But I'll link to everybody we talk about. There was a woman who had written a parenting book, and she had some really interesting things to say about how to evaluate science, which really makes me think of our episode about the appeal to authority, logical fallacy. And I would love to talk to her more about that sometime. There was a secular Jewish speaker who did a really great job.
Yes.
Kind of giving like very clear, concise language to what that means, and was also just like a great speaker. But yeah, we hope to have a lot of people from the conference on, so you can hear from some of the cool folks we talked to.
For sure.
Another thing I wanted to bring up, we've mentioned recovering from religion.
Oh, Kara
before.
was so great to spend so much time talking to us.
Their group there was just so awesome.
Yeah.
And
the American Humanist Association, they were great
yeah,
too.
for sure. But one thing I want to point out, which I had not done my homework and only found out about at the conference, but I will go and find it and link it in the show notes. They have a whole section of resources for parents. So that is super cool. If you are somebody who has had, kind of negative experience with religion, they are a wonderful organization for support. And the fact that they have specific resources for parents is super cool.
Well,
so
we should honestly link it on the website too.
Yeah.
Not just in the show notes for today, but just in general, because we reference that. And we should also talk about the Secular Therapy Project, because that matters too. They go hand in hand. So just, the more resources I think that parents in our community have to help manage the stress of raising children and navigating this weird sort of space we find ourselves, it just, the more the better.
Yeah. So I would highly recommend going if you can. And I think my only regret is that we had a lot of time to talk with the presenters and the people at the booths. And because we were there with our kids, and luckily we had your folks there to do stuff with them during the day, we didn't go to a lot of the events. And so there just wasn't as much time to talk with other attendees.
Wanted to see the cabaret.
Yeah, that would have been cool. Though honestly, I don't know if events would have been a great time to talk with attendees either, because there's other stuff going on. So I think my only regret is that I didn't figure out a better way to talk with more of the attendees.
Well, hey, I want to go to the ACA's Bat Cruise sometime. So
I know.
There are a lot of these sorts of events that I think that we should go be a part of. Like I said, I want us to be a bigger part of the community. While we were there, I got totally inspired to get more into, being a part of local groups. Spoiler alert, we are moving to another city, and that city has a reasonably strong secular community in general, but also a Jewish secular community. And I want to get into both of those. And then, just be a bigger part of parent-teacher organizations, because we're going to be going to a very purplish-red state that may have voices in the parent-teacher organizations and in the school board that run contrary to humanism. And so I would love to let my voice support humanists in the audience, and then also provide pushback to any sort of weird non-humanistic stuff that they might try to do. Just, it was a great sort of blossoming moment, my equilibrium being broken notwithstanding.
Did you expect to be so inspired, or were you surprised?
Oh, not at all. I didn't expect that. It was a lovely surprise. It was a great byproduct. Very happy I went.
And what do you think particularly about the experience made your perspective on that change so much?
I guess since I deconstructed or fully deconverted, aside from you, and talking to people online, I hadn't really done any sort of events being surrounded and supported by a secular community. And seeing what was possible and talking to people that organize these things, they seemed very much, I don't know, like me. And so I was like, oh, well, this seems like I have a great deal of conviction about this, not just in the podcast, but beyond. So this is something that I should, at the very least, investigate and see how I can fit it into my life. I'm not going to go out and become, some sort of, neo-atheist firebrand on Capitol Hill, storming like congressional meetings and stuff. Like, I don't envision that. That's not me. But engaging with school boards, talking to local politicians, I could do that. I think I could do that. And it would be a relatively small expenditure of time for something that in a, purplish red state may go a long way.
Yeah. And I also just have to do a shout out, Dan Beecher, who does
Dan Beecher.
Who does Thank God I'm an Atheist and Data Over Dogma, both of which we've talked about and are both wonderful programs. I don't know if I've said it specifically before. Like, this podcast would not exist without him, because when I was trying to kind of figure out what I wanted to do, he was kind enough to get on the phone with me. And that was really the conversation that... What are you laughing at?
Guy, get on the phone. He convinced you to like just do it and not waste any time, which is so cool. I don't know. That's how you described it. It was I was on the fence, and he was like, if not now, when? And so I was like, oh, okay, great, let's do a podcast. And I'm like, okay, great, let's do a podcast. And it's like, his enthusiasm is infectious.
Yeah, but we got to meet him in person, and he is just perfectly lovely, just as perfectly lovely as you would expect from everything he does, and that was pretty special for me.
And you got to meet with Eli.
Yes, who I cornered and discussed nothing atheism related. I just made him validate my life choices. So it was, that was maybe weird for him. This is Eli Bosnick from Scathing Atheist and Dear Old Dads. So perhaps that was a weird interaction he wasn't expecting, but was very gratifying for me. But yes, he was also just wonderful to speak with. Mm-hmm. But for our first topic, we actually want to talk about a couple of the presenters we met at the conference.
Yes.
Because I think one of the things I like best about not being a religious person is that you can admit that you're wrong whenever you want. And that doesn't have to like shake the foundations of your existence. There's just like freedom to be like, oh yeah, I was wrong about that. We can do better there. And that is just, and you can just do that. And you don't have to worry that like it disagrees with some cosmic thing you believe. And so that's what I wanted to talk about. So in an earlier episode, we talked about presentations in media. There were really great presentations of motherhood and parenting. And one of the movies that came up was Witness. And I still think that the mother and son performances in that movie are something quite special. But interestingly enough, for a show about atheism, we didn't address the Amishness of it that much. And this came up because at the conference, they had a group of speakers talking about the Amish, and is the correct term plain people? Did they also use that?
Plain folk, yeah.
Plain folk communities. And, it's really interesting because when I watched that movie as a kid, my mom has a background in anthropology, and she had read some books about the Amish, and we talked about, kind of some of the interesting aspects of those communities. And intellectually, I can tell you that any religion that gives more power and rights to one group within that society, like men,
Yep.
than another is going to have bad consequences. But I had not thought about it much with the Amish. And these speakers, what they talked about was so powerful. And what they are working to expose, and there's a TV show and a podcast. Hang on. Mm-hmm. So there's a podcast called the Plain People's Podcast, and then also the Misfit Amish.
Yes.
And they are both working to expose the horrible abuse that's happening in those communities. So just a warning, if you don't want to hear about CSA, we'll put a time code in the show notes and you might want to skip ahead a little bit.
Yeah.
But I had no idea how bad it was in those communities. And when we were speaking with them at their booth, they brought up witness. And it had not occurred to me, when you have experienced just terrible treatment in a group, to have this image out there, which is basically like everybody's touch point for it, be this like incredibly positive depiction, is incredibly painful. And so I will like never talk about that movie the same way again without mentioning that it does not depict the reality of that situation. So I would encourage everybody to check out those podcasts and read more about the people whose names I will link in the show notes. But just to give you an idea, the person who hosts Misfit Amish talked about a survey they did. And I might be a little bit off on the numbers. I think it was sent to 400 people and 300 responded. But over 50% of people reported experiencing some kind of child sexual abuse or being closely related with somebody who was. And, and also talking about so much of what women are asked to do as far as the dress and all the other codes. It is specifically stated, and mothers often specifically tell their children that they are doing that to not entice their fathers and brothers, which is just
fathers and brothers.
Which I just, yeah.
I mean, like, how many red flags can you get with one edict? It was mind-blowingly sad hearing all those stories.
And also the terrible treatment of gay people, non-binary people in those communities. But the thing that maybe surprised me the most, because the one thing that I thought might be true about those positive depictions that we see in films like Witness is that it is a community that like supports each other and holds each other up. And clearly I'm not a part of it, but what the speaker said is that is not actually the case. That there's definitely a system of power, and families that need more help or that are having issues are actually are like way low down in that society, and are that like elders in the church will come and like insist that they turn over their finances to other people in the community. Like, it's not that support is not really used to help people, but that it's used to control people. And that I just did not know.
Yeah.
That was something I would not have known. I think also because I'm interested in autism, I know that's way that the Amish and other plain folk don't report having as many autistic people in their communities. which some people have used in studies to suggest some things that might be, it's just, that's come up in studies that looked at things like, I don't even know, but like trying to determine what might be things that cause autism. Like, since those societies are so different, I know some people have looked at the fact that there are lower numbers to kind of try to triangulate some things. And I had always thought, well, maybe because it's a society where like, then maybe it's underreporting because those people can just sort of like find different places to fit in where it's not so much of a, but again, I was totally wrong about that.
Yeah.
It was so strange. We listened to that group at the conference, and then heading home, was it the Sunday show on the line? It was
a Sunday show on the line where Jimmy and Matt took a call from a woman who was desperately trying to escape her Plain community and her husband's abuse with her 5 children. And, I'm not going to get into her whole story, but one of her kids is autistic. And, of course, the elders in the community, who are also the religious elders, of course, like claim that the kid's autistic because of demons. And it's just so sad.
Yeah. So maybe they're not reporting as many autistic children because, nobody wants to admit they have an autistic child, if that's how they're being treated in the community. But again, I just had no idea. And so it was one of those circumstances where I was like, well, I have
a lot of learning to do.
A lot of learning to do. And yeah. And the other interesting thing, which the speaker spoke about and the woman on the call talked about, is that the police do not want to get involved in those communities.
Yeah.
So
that's some scary mafia stuff right there.
Yeah. And even when people are prosecuted, they're often sent back to homes within the communities. Yep. I mean, it is, this woman who had escaped, who had to leave her 5 children behind, she was reporting, but she's like, I just, the police might not do anything because they don't want to be involved, so, whew. But when I was speaking with the presenters at their booth, I'm like, we are going to correct this. When we get back.
Here we are correcting it.
So yes, beautiful performances, but a story that does not present the community accurately and hides a lot of what's going on.
Yeah.
And one of the speakers, made sure to clarify that, like, obviously there are great people in these communities, but it really seems like a terrible system that's broken and leading to some just horrible abuses, which when you set up these artificial power structures where some people are seen to have greater authority and humanity than others, like, that doesn't go well.
No, it really doesn't.
So so that's something I'm going to be following more. And I am so glad that I learned better.
I loved realizing how many misapprehensions I had at the conference, both about what's possible as a person outside of these big organizations regarding like what you can do with engaging with your community, to facts about Amish and Anabaptists and Mennonites, to different views on secular Judaism. There's a lot. There was a lot. And it was great to go. But the Amish thing floored me. But her name is Mary Byler, who was the woman we were talking to. And her dress, I don't know if you want to talk about this, but
they are also non-binary, cool. So I don't want to assume that they use she,
sorry.
Her
they are, I do not know what their pronouns are.
But yes, Mary Byler, wow. On the first day of the conference, they had on this amazing, it looked like an Amish woman's dress, but at the same time breaking like every rule.
It was wild.
And on the second day of the conference, they were dressed in like an Amish man's outfit with the hat and suit, which I assume also was like breaking everything color-wise, stitching-wise. And I did not have a chance to talk
also
with,
that it was, Mary Byler wearing the suit.
Yeah.
And not like some, dude.
And so I feel a little uncomfortable speaking about it because I don't know the full meaning of that for them.
Mm-hmm.
But, growing up in like an artistic community, it was, to me, that was such intense, beautiful performance art.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's how they saw it. So like, that's why I didn't want to talk about it too much because
that's fair.
I don't want to put but I was like, wow, this is some next level creativity that I probably don't even fully understand all the aspects of. But yeah, it was such an interesting choice. And I would just love to understand their thinking about it even more.
No, good point.
So thinking about being wrong
okay,
made me want to address the next topic. And also talking about Dan Beecher, because if Dan Beecher like inspired this podcast, the other thing that really inspired this podcast is the One Bad Mother podcast.
Yes.
Which is one of the first parenting podcasts I started listening to.
Yes.
So much of what they talk about just like lives in my head as a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is their last year. After this year, the One Bad Mother podcast is no more. It started out as 2 hosts. One had to step away because of family responsibilities. She just didn't have bandwidth for it anymore. She has 3 kids, all of whom she is now homeschooling. And the other host, Biz, kept it going, but is like ready to wrap it up. So
yeah,
I so appreciate the way Biz really thoughtfully decided kind of how to end it and to do this final season. But since we started the podcast, there's something from One Bad Mother that I've been wanting to talk about. And so I keep pushing it off because I'm not sure if I can talk about it as well as I want to. But since it's the final season, like the start of the final season, I feel like we should just
do it
and then come back to it. Like if we can't kind of fully grasp it.
Do it live.
Exactly. So probably the most iconic thing that has come out of the One Bad Mother podcast is you're doing a good job.
Yes.
Just this idea that like, and the listeners like say this, like there have been so many stories about listeners like seeing another mom, in Target who's like all her kids are melting down and she's just like
goes up to her and says, "You're doing a good job."
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
It is like the One Bad Mother handshake. And like that is definitely a huge part of what I've taken away from the show. And just what has made that show. And I think their online groups are continuing.
That's great.
I don't want to say for sure, but I think so. And like, if you are not on the One Bad Mother Facebook group, it is, I often say, the only place like on the internet where you can get actually sort of kind, thoughtful responses to parenting issues. And actually not anymore. The Dear Old Dad's Facebook group is also pretty great, but there are not many places. And just one thing I've sort of taken away is like, most of the things that we judge parents about, like there's just no reason to do it. You think about like the big debates that get really heated online. And I don't know if dads get really heated about this stuff, but like mom groups certainly do, like breastfeeding versus formula, sleep training versus not sleep training.
Right.
When you potty train, attachment parenting, wearing your baby versus not wearing your baby, how
homeschooling versus not homeschooling.
Yes. Baby led weaning versus like other, like all of these things where people get really heated, like
Yep.
everybody is just doing the best job they can.
Yeah.
And trying to figure out what works best for their family.
But it's such a personal and emotionally fraught lane of your life. And when you're a parent, it's a lane of your life. You either choose to ignore it or engage with it in some capacity. But it's a big old freaking lane of your life. And so it's completely understandable that you would have these massive emotional reactions to various aspects of that lane, leading to these just enormously like vitriolic debates and like arguments, and people are like hurling epithets at each other and judging people they've never met. And it's absurd. It's absurd. You know what it's like? It's like me when I was deconverting and I was like that typical angry atheist. I was such a tool, but I came out of it. And so if I can come out of that with all my like ADHD, neurodivergent, whatever, parents can find a way to back it off and see the good in what another person is doing, even if what that person is doing isn't necessarily the same method that, the giver of the praise might choose. Like the intention has to be appreciated. And so that's why I agree. Like you're doing a good job is at its face a fundamentally good idea at its face.
And here's where I don't know what to do, because I both think that as parents, like most of the stuff that we worry about and judge ourselves for, we really should give ourselves and each other a little bit more grace.
Yes.
At the same time, it's kind of a joke where people will be like, oh yeah, and my kids are probably going to need therapy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think there's like an opposite serious side where like in some ways we're fucking up our kids. And we know that there are some people like really doing bad things to their kids.
Yeah.
Often because of their own trauma and their own things they're going to.
Yeah.
But like bad stuff is happening to children. I'm not saying we're all abusing our kids, but like there are parents doing harmful things to their kids. And like, I think few of us are fully realized human beings who have dealt with all of our shit. And like some of that's going to impact our kids.
Yeah.
And I actually don't think, I'm in a lot of parenting groups and I look at a lot of parenting media, and except, you'll see a lot of articles about like how not to yell at your kids. Right? But I don't see much else beyond that about that, like that more complex part of being a parent.
Okay.
And so I just feel this like intense tension of how do we embrace that idea of you're doing a good job and giving ourselves grace for like how challenging being a parent can be. But like also finding ways to maybe become more aware of and like be more honest about and get support about the ways that we like might not be doing things that are great. And I think one of the issues is that the areas that we need grace are like we ran through them. They're these like big areas that everybody goes through. So it's like easy to talk about in these formats, you know what I mean? But I feel like probably the ways we're not being great are like way more individual.
Yeah.
So it's like harder to address because it's like it's based on your own, it's so much more personal and I would think specific.
Yeah. Well, part of part of my writing that has helped with my neurodivergence and my social anxiety and my anxiety about fearing that I'm reading people wrong or responding in a weird way, not really understanding where people are coming from, is looking as clinical and as cold as it sounds, is looking at people as characters and stories. And one thing that's universally true, whether you're like me or somebody who is, neurotypical and a writer, and you have some sort of like quote unquote normal way of looking at people in social situations and understanding, the implications of people's behaviors and their intentionality and all this sort of stuff. The idea of a wound and a flaw, that something happens to somebody in their past, the wound, that generates a false belief that yields actions that run contrary to their goals, the flaw. And so this is exactly that, I think, where you could look at it as, okay, so the person I'm talking to had something happen to them, as we all do, that yielded some sort of false belief about ourselves, about our world, about our communities, about our children, about what we need to do to be good parents. And the flaw can be fought against, but ultimately it's the wound that needs addressing. And so that's why I'm a huge fan of therapy now. I didn't like think much of it before, but I am, and it helped me. And then going forward, journaling and just making myself moment to moment more aware, more cognizant of what I'm doing correctly and incorrectly, and framing that, in accordance with, what I now better understand about my past and everything. It's helped me to such a degree that I don't think I would be an effective parent without all of that. And so it's important to address these things, and just praising somebody when they are, for praising somebody's struggle, because you realize it's a struggle, and struggles take effort, and they often take a community of support to get through them, doesn't necessarily do the person you're praising the service they need. Whereas, sometimes we do need that, cold bucket of water on the head to actually address the wound that's creating these flawed perceptions that are yielding these, let's say, improper or maybe even just like inefficient beliefs, yielding, actions that could be done better. It's in the kid's best interests, I think, then. And in that regard, it's probably the morally correct thing to do, to tell the parent when they could be doing better, and not just to issue blanket praise in solidarity with another parent who you see is like you, struggling through their stuff.
Yeah. And I don't know if like judgment is the solution. I didn't think I was going to bring it up, but I'm reading Drunkish, which is the book by Stephanie Wilder Taylor, who's one of the hosts of For Crying Out Loud. And it's about her realizing she was an alcoholic when she was already a mother of 3. And it's in, and I feel like I have mixed feelings about the whole 12 step. There's the whole aspect that a lot of them are religious.
Yeah.
And she actually talks about, being a non-religious person, kind of how she navigated that for herself. But I know, for anybody looking at that, there are some secular recovery programs.
Not enough.
But there are some out there. So I do have mixed feelings about that. But she really talks about what the meetings were like for her. And I hadn't expected to bring it up, but just the idea that you can go and say out loud the worst things that you've done. And not that people are like, you're a horrible person, but But like just the ability to say it and be in a room where other people are going to acknowledge that they've messed up too and then offer support.
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, because the thing that that made her go into recovery is that she drove drunk with two of her kids in the car.
Oh my gosh.
And nothing happened and she got home safe, but she was like...
Was that her tipping point?
Yeah, that was her tipping point. And, you know, she talks about the first meeting where she just like blurted it out. Like she was so ashamed and she, you know...
And like everybody else in the room was like, yep, did that.
Yeah.
5 times in the same day.
Yeah. And this is really interesting because I hadn't even thought about this aspect. Like now I'm thinking that the two are related. Because if we're so judgmental about these, I don't want to say they're minor decisions because I think they're really important decisions for family. But if we're so judgmental about these things where there really isn't like a strong right or wrong or a need to judge each other, like maybe that makes it even more impossible to like talk about the things that we need to, you know? Because like if someone's going to tell you that you're like murdering your baby by allowing them to eat like processed foods.
Yeah.
Like how could you possibly bring up...
You don't feel safe.
Yeah. Something more... Yeah.
And also speaking of which, like I need to clarify something while I'm thinking of it. Like when I said call it out when you see it, I'm not meaning by that, you know, point a finger and confront the person. I'm saying, you know, encourage the person to seek help. Don't just praise the behavior, actually like encourage them to get support and not just suffer in silence and know that what they're doing is ultimately right. Like if like part of that moral obligation, you know, isn't just to identify when somebody is doing something that could be harmful to them or, you know, or to a minor in particular in this case. But the moral part of that also extends to how you engage with that person that you're trying to help. And, you know, if your goal is to have them get help, then you need to engage with them in a way that actually encourages dialogue and doesn't just raise their armor. So it can't just be this point the finger and try to blame them, or on the other side, praise them and totally back away from the situation. Like there has to be a way where you can engage with empathy, but still engage and encourage them to get help, whereas somebody else might just retreat to a platitude. And to praise them so that way they feel good. Maybe also the person praising feels good when they praise, you know? Like we don't necessarily know what the efficacy of this is. It's like, in a sense, it's kind of like prayer, right? Like, does it actually do what it's purported to do?
Yeah.
So I sorry to interrupt, but I just feel like I needed to head off an apology because I don't think that parents, regardless, like should be shouted at. I don't think that's productive. And I think a lot of online discourse devolves into that because it's so easy to do that with a stranger. And we can't do that in real life. And if you see that happening in real life, like, you know, the proverbial Walmart video with the kid, with the parent with the screaming kids getting confronted by another parent who doesn't like the screaming kids. Like, what does that do? Like, you don't know why the kids are screaming. You don't know why the parent with the screaming kids is having a hard time dealing with it. Like, you just need to approach the situation with empathy and, you know, do the best you can to be the sort of person that you would like to emulate, you know, like the whole be the change sort of thing. If we're going to use platitudes, maybe that's the platitude we should do and keep it to ourselves and then just extend empathy and try to understand where the person is coming from so we can help them like pull the solution out of their situation instead of trying to impose that judgment of either, oh, it's okay, or no, you're doing a bad job. Like there has to be that middle ground where there's actual dialogue happening.
Yeah, it's funny looking at my notes because I have a note that there was a podcast on January 22nd, but I think it's from 2 years ago because
Okay.
that's how long I've been thinking about this. But
Mm-hmm.
let's see, the quote is from David Plotz. So this must have
Okay.
been one of the political gabfest episodes. But they talked about a community of people who took in people with like mental health issues into their homes. I forget the context of that happening.
Okay.
But there's one family that did that had a daughter with mental health issues.
Mm-hmm.
And they talked about how much easier it was to help a stranger with mental health issues than their daughter.
That's wild.
And that story just stuck with me because
I want to hear more about that. That's wild.
Yeah, I got to go. Okay, January 22nd from I'm going to have to go back and look a couple of years. I'll try to find it. But
please.
That to me was just like such a great example of that, where like, that is so hard to admit out loud.
Mm.
But
I mean, what kind of shame do you think that could potentially bring a parent?
Yeah, but it makes
that is wild.
It makes perfect sense, you know?
I guess.
And I don't know. I think it's harder. Like with the stranger.
No, like people are weird. Brains are weird. Like it could very well be that, you know, with a stranger, you are removed from that situation. Like you wouldn't necessarily be predisposed to blaming yourself for any outcome that you're now presented with. You're just dealing with the situation as it's presented to you, which lets you have maybe a more analytical perspective, right? Like instead of having all the emotionality of it being your child, of it being an outcome that you could blame yourself for, blame your genetics, nature, nurture, whatever. Like parents blame themselves for so much already that makes total sense. But I would just love to hear the story because I could envision it going so many different ways.
Yeah,
but
no,
man, that is wild.
Like, I think that's true. I think probably you're also not racked with like all of the expectations you had going into having a child.
Oh,
you know?
Gosh,
I mean, I'm sure
yes,
like everybody,
of course,
you know, has like all the dreams. And when it's not somebody where like you're living with all of the things that you like hope would happen and might not happen. I
would imagine you go through grief. Like you have to submit to that. If you're going to if you're going to grieve for the child that you thought you would have, then like you can't bottle that up. You got to submit to it and like move past it. Right. Like being a parent's hard, bro.
Yeah. And I was trying to think like, I wanted to talk about something that I felt like fell into this category for me. Mm-hmm. And I think the hard thing about this, and I guess why I've sort of been thinking, like, I wish we talked about it more, is because I'm pretty sure that, like, some of the worst things I'll do because, like, I have a blind eye to it. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? And the fact that we don't talk more about the things that we, like, really feel bad about, we, like, have less chances to hear those stories where maybe we can be more conscious of it in ourselves. So, you know, it's not the best example. And I think I've talked about it on the podcast before, but, you know, Reader did have this year where he was in preschool and he just had like a terrible year in his class. And he was being sent to the office all the time. And like I think he spat at somebody. It was like this really weird thing where he had been this kind of like model preschooler that all of his teachers loved. And then got in this classroom where he just had the hardest time. It was also a year where he had like fully dropped his nap and they were still kind of expecting them to do a nap time. And it was just like this whole weird thing. And, you know, we kind of tried to support him by like sending quiet things he could do during nap time and all of this. And it wasn't until the next year when he was in class and we were talking with his teacher and mentioned what had happened. And she looked at us with horror and she was like, I would never send a student to the office. I would always do that in the classroom. And I was like, oh. And I think I've gotten better about this as I've gotten older, but like, you know, I spent a long time as like a real people pleaser and was sort of like an exceptional student because of that. And I realized that I was trying to like fix Reader when what I should have been doing was complaining about the classroom and supporting him and going in and saying, what, like, this is not a kid who has struggled before. What is going on? And what support is he not getting? And why is he being pulled out of class and made to feel like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I think I just like 100% fucked it up. And I think I'm lucky that he was pretty resilient and I don't think it had a huge impact on his self-esteem. But like in that moment, I was like, what was I doing? Like, I just fully, like, I just misread it every way possible and didn't think about what was actually going on. And like that story, I think if my friend had come to me and been like, oh, my daughter's getting like pulled out of class every day and sent to the office. And if I knew that kid, like I think the advice I would have given would have probably been different. Like, I think if it had been somebody not my kid, I think it would have been more likely that I would have been like, well, don't you think maybe some other stuff is going on? Like, maybe you should talk with the teacher or talk. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure, but yeah. And I never would have known. I never would have even thought about it if that other teacher hadn't said something. Like, not at all. I never would have realized that happened or that I made a mistake if I hadn't had somebody see the situation and mirror back a different perception of it.
So get help, in other words. Don't be afraid to ask for help, to ask for a different perspective. I do. Help. You know, I wouldn't be the dad or the writer that I am today if I didn't have a community of support.
Hey, this is Moms and Pops from the future. I just wanted to break in because we've done a lot of talking about, you know, being parents and when we mess up and being able to talk with each other. And I just wanted to make extremely clear that when we are talking about giving grace and talking with parents, that is like, you know, you see your friend dealing with the death of a parent and they are in a bad place and are having a really hard time with their kids acting up and are flying off the handle way more than they otherwise would. Or, you know, your friend, you know, grew up in poverty and is like now having a really hard time figuring out how to deal with like when they do and don't give things to their kids and like that's causing them stress, like those type of situations. And I just want to make sure it's clear that if you feel like you have very clear evidence that a child is being physically abused or neglected, in that circumstance, like it really is important to reach out. And this gets real complex because I know families of color and people struggling financially often find themselves wrapped up in the system way too easily. But if there's a family that you know well, where you really think something bad might be going on, I feel like particularly when it's people in our own social circles, it feels real hard to call something in or say something. But I just wanted to make sure we were being very clear. If you really think you know of a child being harmed, I believe every state has a child abuse hotline. Like, please don't let that go. Just wanted to make sure that was clear. Pops?
I agree 100%.
So, I mean, there was
Seek help. I've said it many times. Seek help. We can't do this alone. We need a community of parents, but also we need to lean on the professional organizations and institutions that can help us psychologically, that can help us with our safety, and that can help safeguard, those of us who might not necessarily be totally in control of our circumstances.
Yeah. So just wanted to give that little PSA. Man, it's rough, and I hope nobody's experiencing that. But if you are, please help that kid.
Wow, that was an episode.
Yeah, really lighthearted.
Your language. Yeah, I got to say, Moms, today your language was a little bit salty. You was like 300% saltier than usual. I was counting.
Really?
Oh yeah, you had like 2 or 3 F-bombs. It was, yeah.
I had no idea.
Salty. The salty sailor.
I've been spending too much time with Go.
Oh yes, Go is a wordsmith par excellence.
Yeah. What was it? Oh, so sorry. I just think this is so funny. So, we were talking about how terribly, this is not funny. We were talking about how terribly autistic children were treated in the Amish community. Mm-hmm. But like a while back, I was telling Go about a preacher who said something equally horrible about autistic kids, about how like God wouldn't make a mistake like that.
Yeah.
It was this horrible thing. And it's so funny because Go's like kind of for a while most fervent insult was rude. And so he was like, that is fucking rude. And I just think it's so funny to see a 7-year-old swear and then use an insult that is like a 1950s grandmother.
Yeah.
Insult. It was such a weird combination of things.
Yeah. Par excellence.
Yeah. All right. So, ending there, we need to thank Jonathan Zalbin and First Frame Music for the music for this podcast.
And so that wraps up this episode of The Family Skeptical, where nothing is sacred
except for our kids.